So when you start to take a look at agility as a whole, when you consider all of those different factors, those that are physical, those that are cognitive, those that are more perceptual in nature, and then you put that together with all of the different factors, physical factors that we just made in that last list, you will then start to get a picture of how integrated these types of things really are. Now, there are all the lifting skills and things like that that we can discuss and have discussed, but here's the deal. The ability to do things like agility, speed, quickness better are really rooted in those capabilities. And so you can make somebody better at agility. You can make somebody better at quickness and speed. The question is, without the enhancement from the other side, how much more are you actually going to get? This is really what bothers me about some athletes, and you are going to run into them who have been basically spoiled on the whole concept of resistance training or much outside of the court or field or whatever they perform on. They have believed that they're going to be slowed down, inhibited, or anything like that. That's all. That goes back to the same amount of that same space and time where basketball players thought that if they lifted weight, it will somehow throw off their free throw or their shot from the three-point line, things like that, such that it would destroy their ability to do that, and that has not been proven at this point. I think you are going to run into most of these problems. I've seen as many of those types of problems when I've dealt with golfers and tennis players specifically. And if you do deal with people who maybe come from other places, maybe even other countries where they don't have training on the level that we do, you're going to see that these attitudes are going to be a lot more common. So I want to kind of prepare you for that reality in all of this. So now, a little something that I have for you in one of the papers I really, really want you to read, because I might be talking to you about this later on and even asking about it on your next exam, is a little bit about the strength shortening cycle. Now, this may be the exercise physiologist to me, but I really want you to understand exactly what it is that you are asking a body to do when you were prescribing agility, quickness, and things like that as activities that go towards somebody's training. So this is a very, very complex concept. We're dealing with both anatomical and performance features, and really this is what all of it is, but this one is particularly elaborate. I want you to really make sure that you understand the stretch shortening cycle in all of this. So let's take a look a little bit at force application, and these are just some real basic things. I know most of you have seen some of this stuff. Those of you who already have your CSCS or another strength coach certification, you've been educated, at least through your biomechanics, on what force production is all about. And again, we've talked about some of these things already, but force is truly mass times acceleration. And you've heard me say it already before, but the essence of what we should be able to do with athletes is allow them to move their own body weight more effectively. What you may not understand are maybe some of the other things that actually go into dealing with some of the more elaborate areas, such as dealing with things like ground reaction forces. And I'm going to talk to you about change of direction on the next slide. All right, but the truth of the matter is we make assumptions about athletes, especially if they're remotely successful, that they already have the capabilities to apply force properly and even in the proper directions. When people practice, when people test for you in any way, shape, or form, that is not only your opportunity to get information about what types of testing results they actually produce, but this is your opportunity to watch them actually do things and evaluate them as they do them to see if they even have the proper forms for executing these activities. So watching is really, really an important part of what you are going to do. So allow them to do things as long as it's not dangerous, and then go back and start teaching proper force applications and see how well they deal with ground reaction forces. In some cases, if you'll follow my cursor over here to the right, you will find that when some people run, the way they run, and this is usually dictated by the lean that you'll see right here, you'll see that some people actually run and have a ground reaction force that is coming in the direction that you see right here when they land with that front foot. Now, that's going to actually allow them to waste a whole lot of energy, and you're going to see me talk about this a little bit later. But realistically, we want to keep those ground reaction forces in this type of a direction so that they can accelerate in that plane a lot more effectively. So we want to keep them from having ground reaction forces that are counter to what they're trying to do. If a person is truly moving in this direction, We don't want somebody having ground reaction forces that are contrary to what they're trying to achieve. Okay, so, all right, anyway, let's look a little bit at that change of direction. So this is kind of what I was referring to a few moments ago. You might notice inconsistencies in things like foot landing, things like that, different angles maybe that may not be totally suited to producing the best outcomes. Here's what you have to consider, and this is a pretty elementary graphic on the right here, but in this graphic you can definitely see that there are at least three major considerations in the X, Y, and Z types of planes for how a person applies and responds to ground reaction forces. And so overall, again, we don't want that angle to truly compromise the ability to overcome the force of gravity. And it's amazing that sometimes you can teach proper landing skills, proper leans, proper foot placement that will allow people to all of a sudden change their performance in a fairly significant way. And we notice that when these things are not applied properly, that we may see issues with slippage or falling or things like that. And this is kind of what I was just talking about, too many horizontal forces not allowing us to overcome the force of gravity. So there are tons of different things to think about when we put all this stuff together. So overall, agility and quickness really need to be improved in relation to the demands of the sport, but at the same time, we have to specifically look at that athlete and determine where are their strengths and weaknesses, what little parts of what I'm seeing them do or not do might I have to capitalize on. So let's look a little bit at some of these things and give you some technical guidelines for how to look at these types of things. So you have to teach most all of these things. Now, I know a lot of people, they get kind of paralyzed because they'll teach they know a whole lot of different drills, and so they seem like they blow through all of these drills in a fairly short amount of time, and then they don't know what to do with themselves. And this is where it gets kind of touchy for a few people. So there are some good technical guidelines and suggestions that you should really consider on a separate basis. You got to understand that when you do agility types of workouts, it's not just about going through the motions. All right, if you don't teach what the specifics are, this is where it can get kind of ugly for those people. They may not respond at all. And the thing of it is, we have to teach all of these pieces and parts if they are going to do things. How many times, let me ask you this, how many times have you ever been told to do something, but you were never told why to do something, and it never made a lot of sense, so you did just go through the motions? But when you were taught what is important about those things, you started to know what to pay attention to, and that's where it got a little easier for you. So for example, you need to be teaching things like visual focus. Where should they be looking? What should they be looking at? Where should their mental focus be? What type of body position? Now, you're going to see people go through these different drills in all kinds of body positions, and if you're not paying attention and just letting them go through it, there are going to be a lot of them that are doing it wrong. This is where you come in. What is their leg action? What is their arm action? What should everything be doing? So all of these things need to be the considerations about how these people are going to perform. So let's look at some of the different training goals. The primary goal of agility performance is really kind of like threefold. All right. So again, we've got the enhanced perceptual cognitive ability. All right. Various types of situations and scenarios that you can create. And don't worry about coming up with something that nobody's ever seen before. All right. This is one of the other roadblocks that I run into with a lot of coaches. They'll say, yeah, but I don't want to do something that somebody else has already done. Every single one of us stands on the backs of giants. That's why we pick up books. This is why we read. This is why we do all the stuff that we do. So don't worry about having the most original things. After you get good at what you do, then you can come up with original things. But for now, let's work on things with stuff that other people have already used and is proven. In addition to the enhanced perceptual cognitive, there is the effective and rapid breaking of one's momentum. And I talked about this before. This is one of the most complicated skills to learn. And to think that you have to actually stop and teach somebody how to slow down is sort of ridiculous on the surface. But when you start really looking at it, you'll find out that most athletes truly do not know how to do this in a way that where eventually they're not going to start to break down. When you teach them the proper skills, you're going to see kind of a backslide backslide for a while until they get this down, and then it's going to become so natural that their performance is going to be enhanced. So you need to look for those types of things. I have some articles available for you on those exact things. And of course, rapid acceleration. And this is where the speed aspect also comes in as well. There are so many little problems that people can have. Like, for instance, a lot of times when people do a rapid acceleration, they'll have a back step and they'll rock on that back foot before they finally decide to go forward. And this is where it gets kind of strange. So you may have to look for that type of stuff overall before you can decide whether somebody's got something that you can correct. So let's take a look at some of the different strategies, just off the top. Step number one is pretty straightforward. This is where your needs analysis really comes in. All right, so you've looked at the sport. You've seen the need analysis that we've done at this point. Many of you hit that right on the head, but just minor issues. But what are the needs of that sport in terms of movement, lateral movement, visual focus? Look at all those different things that you need to look at, and then start to look at ways in which you can match this up with various forms of training, especially in the agility neighborhood, and then perform some basic testing to see what it is that your people need from you. Not just running through a bunch of drills. Anybody can do that. Let's talk about learning how to do things properly. I told you, I know people who might go through 20 different drills when in fact they need to be concentrating on 3 and how to properly do them. So you can decide how many and what, but this is a building process. But you should never, ever stop going back to the most basic concepts. They should always be relearned. Every time you think that they have it, they may need to go back and see it again. Step number 2, determine the strengths and weaknesses by comparing the results of the standardized scores to performance standards or whatever the team mean is. So you can start to determine who is where in the grand scheme of this group, who might need a little bit more work. You've watched them do their testing. You know what could be problematic for these people. Step number 3. Plan the development of a primary area of need and secondary area of need for your athletes. So this is actually a decent guideline. This will allow you to look at something and say, okay, I know what the primary need is. I know what the secondary need is. And not that you can't have other things in there that you've identified, but look for 2 things. It's kind of like increasing in intensity. You can do way too much at one time. Think of just a couple things that you might be able to change and improve on. Number 4, distribute the time available for this development based on need identification. Your toughest problems that you're going to encounter, especially if you work in an NCAA or high school type setting, is the problem of allotting your time properly. And I think this is where a lot of people get into trouble. But if you're really lucky most of the time, if you get 3 days a week out of your people, then that's actually going to be pretty impressive, especially in an NCAA type setting. The question is, if you know you get them for that amount of time, what are you going to do with them that's going to be the most effective based on where they are in the season and as a team? And so that's one of your biggest challenges. Those of you who might work in private facilities where possibly you get people on a very regular basis, this is going to be a slightly different thing. You might have a lot more access, and this is why some of those people may tend to actually do a pretty good job or advance a little bit more quickly. So step number 5, provide a preliminary plan for transitioning of distribution through the different training blocks. And so at what point do you know that they're ready to move on to the next area? And so this is where we want to make sure that we have all of our ducks in a row. You want to not only have a plan for what needs to happen, but how do we know when to move to the next area? Okay, some people take the standpoint of, well, I want to make sure they get exposure to a little bit of everything, and other people want to make sure certain things are really mastered before they move on to the very next thing. So whatever you're comfortable with, this can make the decision for how you put this all together. And so in the next section, we're going to talk a little bit about quickness and how to recognize and react in a very quick fashion.